Destined for the front line in Russia, Mary Seacole couldn't resist the temptation to visit the British Army hospital in Turkey that had rejected her.
Nurses passed in and out with noiseless tread and subdued manner. I thought many of them had that strange expression of the eyes which those who have gazed long on scenes of war or horror seldom lose.
Scutari Hospital was a place of regimentation and strict discipline. With limited resources, Florence Nightingale ran the hospital with an iron hand.
I don't think Mary would ever have fitted into Florence Nightingale's system. I can't imagine Mary with all her feistiness and her opinionated manner, and also fundamentally totally different methodology, which was hands-on, by the bedside, holding a dying man, not standing at a distance.
Oh my God!
As Seacole bumped into old friends from Jamaica, she instinctively broke one of Nightingale's most cherished rules. Nurses should not fraternize with patients.
Oh dear, this is no good. This is no good.
At some slight risk of giving offence, I could not resist the temptation of lending a helping hand here and there, easing a stiff bandage that was giving pain, or replacing one that had slipped.
Oh no, this is disgusting. This will never do.
Nightingale's staff assumed Mary Seacole was looking for a job. The stage was set. Two of the most powerful personalities in British medicine were about to come face to face.
A slight figure in the nurse's dress, with a pale, gentle, and above all firm face, resting lightly in the palm of one white hand, while the other supports the elbow, a position which gives to her countenance a keen, inquiring expression, which is rather marked.
What do you want, Mrs. Seacole? Anything we can do for you? If it lies within my power, I shall be very happy.
I just need a room for tonight, as it's too dark to return to my ship.
Certainly. It will be arranged.
Florence Nightingale.
Good night.
That English woman whose name shall never die, but sound on the lips of British men until the hour of doom. One thought never left my mind as I walked through those fearful miles of suffering in that great hospital. If it is so here, what must it be like at the scene of war? I felt happy in the conviction that I must be useful 3 or 4 days nearer to the soldiers pressing once than this.
Florence Nightingale's hospital was in Turkey, 4 days' sail from the front line in Russia. Many wounded men refused to risk the journey. Mary Seacole wanted to get as close to the war zone as she could. She stopped at a small patch of land just a few miles from the front and recreated the Jamaica of her youth. In just a few weeks, she had recycled timbers and sheets of metal dredged from the harbour to conjure, out of nowhere, a restaurant, general store, and clinic rolled into one. In typical Seacole fashion, she called it the British Hotel.
You might get everything at Mother Seacole's, from an anchor to a needle. For the outer man, linen and hosiery, boots and shoes, and for the inner man, salmon, lobsters, and oysters in tins, wild fowl, curry powder, snuff, and currant jelly. Or you would have stumbled upon a good Irish stew, nice and hot, or some capital beef pies.
I so wish that we had an illustration of the outside of the British Hotel in the Crimea. It's wonderful from the inside, but outside it must have looked extraordinary. It was built from bits and bobs, from flotsam and jetsam. It was a very organic place, with Mary pulsing at the middle of it.
I think, in her own very small way, up at that British hotel, stranded in the middle of nowhere, Mary provided a little oasis of conviviality.
Tails.
Heads.
Of home, of laughter, of normal human intercourse and behaviour, where people could be happy and forget war.
Whatever confusion and disorder existed elsewhere, comfort and order were always to be found at the British Hotel.
There are some lovely accounts where soldiers turn up late at night and there's quite uproarious parties going on with much drinking. And others talk about arriving and having long talks into the night about the old days in the West Indies.
But the British Hotel was much more than an officers' club. It was a business whose profits would finance a higher purpose.
Quite a few of the soldier eyewitnesses in the Crimea said she did not blush to charge 1 6 for a bottle of porter or the highest price for her best champagne. But the fact is, she also made clear that it was because the well-paid navvies in the workcorps that helped transport things to the front, because they could afford her high prices, and because obviously the officers could, that subsidised her. That enabled her to keep going, making her herbal remedies and giving them out free to those without money who needed help.
Within weeks of opening, the British Hotel had become the soldiers' hospital of choice. Mary Seacole's treatments for cholera and dysentery actually worked. Her success attracted the attention of the Crimean War correspondent, William Howard Russell of the Times.
Her hut was surrounded every morning by the rough navvies and land transport men, who had a faith in her proficiency in the healing art, which she justified by many cures.
New research has revealed that Mary Seacole was described vividly in more than 20 eyewitness accounts of the war.
I was severely attacked by diarrhoea after landing in the Crimea, and nothing served me until I called on Mrs. Seacole. She gave me her medicine but once, and I was cured.
She was Principal Medical Officer to the Army Works Corps, and at the time of the cholera last summer, used to prescribe pomegranate juice, which was an almost never-failing specific.
The use of pomegranate was typically effective.
It is highly astringent, and it's been used quite extensively internally, mostly in the treatment of diarrhea. This actually has a beneficial effect. So she simply and very undogmatically took the experience she brought with her and applied it under local circumstances. She does integrate things which were highly uncommon and completely unheard of by the medical establishment in Britain. For a soldier sitting there under these enormously difficult circumstances, somebody like Mary must have come like an angel, because she finally did something from his perspective.
It couldn't have been more different at Scutari, with its miles of bed-lined corridors, where one-to-one treatment was virtually impossible. Florence Nightingale was a superb but impersonal administrator. Patients were treated with fairness, but detachment.
She would nod at us, and we could only kiss her shadow.
In one other respect, the two women were very different. Florence Nightingale visited the Crimea only twice during the war. Mary Seacole was at the front line almost every day.
Mrs. Seacole is often seen riding out to the front with baskets of medicines of her own preparation.
Her never-failing presence among the wounded after the battle and assisting them made her beloved by the rank and file of the whole army.
At the Battle of Crimea, she was found administering creature comforts to the wounded, utterly unmindful of the shot and shell flying about her in all directions.
In the teeth of battle, Mary Seacole proved herself as a hands-on surgeon, as William Howard Russell of the Times told his readers.
I have witnessed her devotion and courage. I've seen her go down under fire with her store of creature comforts for our wounded men, and a more tender or skillful hand about a wound or a broken limb could not be found among our best surgeons.
There's one thing that all the eyewitnesses concur on, is that Mary was effectively legendary throughout the Crimea. There was this enormous affection for her, amusement too, because of her rather loud and domineering manner and her eccentric style of dress, wearing sort of plumed hats in the midst of war.
Mary Seacole, the child of the British Army in Jamaica, had effectively become its mother in the Crimea.
God save our gracious Queen.
The deaths in the trenches touched me very deeply. It was very usual when a young officer was ordered into the trenches for him to ride down to the hotel to dine. They seldom failed on those occasions to shake my hand at parting.
God save the Queen.
I used to think it was like having a large family of children ill with fever and dreading to hear which one had passed away in the night.
My dear madam, will you do me the favour to accept the enclosed trifle, in remembrance of that dear son, whose last moments were soothed by your kindness?
Death is always terrible. No one need be ashamed to fear it. I have seen some brave men die trembling like children, whereas others who have spent their lives in avoidance of the least danger or trouble have drawn their last painful breath like heroes, striking their foes to the last, robbing them of victory, and making their defeat a triumph. If I were to speak of all the nameless horrors of that spring as plainly as I could, I should disgust you. But a day in the Crimea was a long time to give to grief.
By the time British soldiers were finally sent home after defeating the Russians in 1856, Mary Seacole had served 18 months in the Crimea.
When the war ended and her boys were all sent off here, there, many onto the Indian Mutiny, she was completely rudderless. She'd lost her huge family.
All this going home seemed strange and somewhat sad. And sometimes I felt that I could not sympathize with the glad faces and happy hearts of those who were looking forward to the delights of home. For I clearly had no home to go to.
The Jamaican doctress, who had risked so much in her role as a mother of the British Army, faced the prospect of returning to London a nobody. She had invested all her capital in new supplies. It seemed everything she owned would now fall into Russian hands.
I was glad to hear of peace, although it must have been apparent to everyone that it would cause my ruin.
Mary Seacole returned to London with nothing.